Hello you guys, what is going on? Today I'm going to show you the best Barbarian build you can use to levels from level 1 to 50 and 50 to 100. This build covers the entire spectrum and can act as a beginning leveling build and transition all the way to the end game and be extremely powerful. The build not only is extremely powerful, but lets you speed level like no other Barbarian currently will, in my opinion. That being said, I'll show you everything you need to know. If you stick around for the entire video and fully understand this build, you will be unstoppable. And all of the links will be in the description and the pinned comment for the entire build planner. And you can follow that from every skill that I take, every single thing. So make sure to check that out in the description and pinned comment. That being said, let's go. So to start off, we're going to take 1 out of 5 for lunging strike for our basic skill, and then enhanced and combat lunging strike. This is going to make it so each time we hit a critical strike with lunging strike early, that means we're going to be granting ourselves berserking for 1.5 seconds and grants us 25% increased damage and 15% extra movement speed. This is a very valuable thing early on, allowing us to constantly stay in a state of berserking. And not only that, but we add to that with double swing, which is our main core damage ability. And then we want to take enhanced double swing and violent double swing, so that way both hits of double swing actually make them vulnerable, or enemies vulnerable, for 2 seconds. Now early on you can actually choose if you want to take furious double swing. This is going to make it so that while berserking, it grants an additional 2 seconds of berserking, allowing us to stay in a constant state of berserking non-stop, basically, especially early in the game. So early you might want to take furious, so depending on what you want, you can take either of these. Ideally it just depends if you have a constant uptime on berserking. If you already do, then taking violent would be the move. Then we can go ahead and take, for our defensive skills, we're going to take Rallying Cry 1 out of 5 into enhanced, and then tactical Rallying Cry. This is going to allow us to get a solid fury generation early. Then we want 3 out of 3 for imposing presence, so that we get that additional 18% additional max life. And then we want 1 out of 3 for outburst, so we gain thorns this way. And then we also want to take tough as nails 1 out of 3. This is going to make it so that when enemies hit us, they take bleeding damage. And so since they're now bleeding, all of our bonuses to bleeding enemies now take effect because enemies are bleeding, so you obviously get the bonuses for that. So then we want to come over here to our brawling skills. For our brawling skills, we want 3 out of 3 for swiftness. For our movement speed, we also want 1 out of 5 for war cry into power war cry. It makes it so that if at least 6 enemies are nearby when we use this, we get an additional damage bonus, as well as granting us, again, berserking for even more time. We then want 3 out of 3 for booming voice, so that way our shout skill effects durations are increased by 24%. And then 5 out of 5 for leap, which is a great movement skill early and late game. So that way, if we actually use leap, we get automatic fury generation at the immediate point. And again, we get to leap across the map. Who doesn't like that? So then we want 1 out of 3 for aggressive resistance, prolific fury, so that way while we're actually berserking, which we should have constant uptime for at this point, again, you can take the other double swing skill if you're having issues with that. So that way our fury generation gets an automatic 18% increase across the board while we're fighting. And then battle fervor, so that way when a brawling skill damages at least 1 enemy, we get berserking for 3 seconds. So again, doing that with leap, we get 3 seconds just for using leap on enemies, putting us into a state of berserking instantly. So then we want to take 3 out of 3 for Pit Fighter, so we deal increased damage to close enemies and gain distant damage reduction. This is overall just a good DR ability. And then we want 1 out of 3 for Thick Skin, so that way each time we take direct damage, we gain a certain amount as Fortify, and then 3 out of 3 for Counteroffensive. So while you have Fortify over 50% of your max life, you deal 12% increased damage. Big damage buff. We're going to stay fortified consistently with this build, the way it's set up, so this is a great skill for extra damage. Then we want to take Wrath of the Berserker all the way down to Supreme Wrath of the Berserker for additional bonus and overall berserking damage bonus. And then wall up here for 3 out of 3, so your skills using bludgeoning weapons deal 30% increased damage if the enemy's stunned or vulnerable. We're going to be using a mace as one of our one-handed weapons, so that way this will apply, giving us a bunch of extra damage to vulnerable enemies. And then concussion, so we skills using bludgeoning weapons have up to a 30% chance to stun enemies. So this is also good because we're going to be possibly stunning enemies, since we're going to be using our dual wielded weapons, some sort of one-handed sword and a one-handed mace, giving us both of these solid bonuses. And then finally, we also want constrained, so we increase our berserking's maximum duration by 5 seconds and increase its bonus damage up to 100%, meaning we're going to be doing a lot more damage just playing the game, not even trying to get berserking, because we get it naturally through all of our skills and abilities. this is the key passive you need. Next, I want to touch on the aspects briefly. Again, that build planner in the description has all of these aspects and everything laid out for the entire build. So some of the big ones you need, especially for the Dust Devils, which may take you a while to find because I believe they are going to be random drops in Season 4. First is the Devilish aspect. This makes it so after generating 100 Fury, your next direct damage creates 3 Dust Devils that deal damage to enemies. You want to make sure this is on your two-handed slashing weapon specifically, so you get the additional buffs from it being on your two-handed versus one of your one-handed weapons. Also, the Wind Lasher aspect on your amulet, so that when casting Double Swing, it creates a Dust Devil. Again, this is a big one, and make sure you put it on your amulet so you get the extra bonuses from that. And then aspect of Fierce Wind, so your shout skills create 3 Dust Devils that deal damage to enemies along their path, and the Dust Devils get bigger and deal increased damage based on whatever size they are. So the bigger size your Dust Devils are, the more damage they do, up to, again, 20%. So make sure that's also on your two-handed bludgeoning weapon. As long as you have those 3 primary aspects, your Dust Devil build should come online pretty quickly. Now, for some of the other aspects, especially once we start getting towards a little bit later game, you'll want aspect of the Numbing Wrath on your helmet. So each point of Fury generated while at maximum Fury grants you Fortify. Again, this stacks with our Fortify and Paragon nodes, which I'm going to show you here in just a little bit, that make this build extremely OP, especially in-game. Aspect of Disobedience, that way we get increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to a certain amount. Now, eventually you can switch this out for possibly another DR ability, since DR is a little bit more rare in Season 4, especially if we meet our armor cap by default through our regular gear. So if you meet that armor cap, you can swap this out for something more important. Then Accelerating aspect, this is a critical one. So with critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed, and if you get up to 25% attack speed for 5 seconds with all the other stats that we have on this build, you're going to be doing an insane amount of damage very quickly. So then we want aspect of Volcathos, so that way our leap actually creates an earthquake that provides damage over 4 seconds and gives us a large amount of damage reduction. So we leap onto enemies, cause an earthquake, start hitting people, and we take a lot less damage because of this and do a lot more damage as well. And then Ghostwalker aspect, obviously you want that for your boots, so that way you get increased movement speed all the way up to level 100. And then for our first dual wielding weapon, and then you want the earthquake aspect. Forget the ground stomp part of this. The main thing we want is while standing in an earthquake, you deal increased damage, and we'll be standing in that earthquake that's caused by the aspect of Volcathos when we use our leap onto enemies, giving us even more damage while we're again standing in that earthquake and damage reduction. And then we want the Bold Chieftain's aspect, so that when using a shout skill, you get temporary cooldowns for all of your shouts, which is big because the faster they cool down, the more you get to use them, get damage buffs, etc., and the more Dust Devils you get to spawn. So that's a win-win. And then aspect of Giant Stride, so that way it reduces the cooldown of leap by 2.5 to 5 seconds. Again, the more we're using leap consistently, if it's always off of cooldown, the more we get to use it and spawn our earthquake, which means 25% automatic damage reduction across the board. You just can't beat that whatsoever. So, and then the final weapon we want to use for our one-hander, ideally aspect of Intercom would be good here. So when we're standing in our earthquake, we get increased damage. And if you stand there for 3 seconds, it can triple that bonus, meaning we can get 30% additional damage just by standing in our earthquake and spawning our Dust Devils. These are the aspects you want. If you can get all these, you will be unstoppable. And again, this guide has all of these right here. And as you look over these, if you can actually unlock them in a region, you can see it actually tells you where that region is, so you can know exactly how to unlock it. Now for our expertise, we're going to be using the two-handed axe expertise. That's because again, we get increased damage to vulnerable enemies, as well as increased critical strike chance against vulnerable enemies. That is a big must-have, especially for this build, giving us a lot higher chances of A, doing more damage, and B, doing more critical strikes. And then for our gems, we want the emerald on our weapon, so we get vulnerable damage. We want the ruby on our actual gear, so that way we get max life. And then we want diamonds probably on our actual pieces of jewelry, so that way we get all the resistance from them. Now again, to also mention the gear stats for what exactly you want on this gear and how you want to temper this to get the best possible build. All of this stuff is also in that build planner. So you can look here, or you can just go to that build planner and favorite it, and it will give you everything you need to know to have the maxed out Dust Devil Barbarian. Next, I'll go over the Paragon board really quickly, and the way this is set up is efficient for not only leveling, but in-game as well. So make sure you pay attention to set it up this way. So first we want to start with the starter board, and we're going to use the exploit glyph here. This way we get our basic barbarian effects. That way enemies become vulnerable for 3 seconds once you damage them, giving us increased damage to enemies very quickly. So that means as soon as we hit an enemy, they become vulnerable, they take a lot more damage from us, and hopefully we can wipe them out within that 3 seconds. And it's just an overall great damage buff, and especially to use this glyph early, and it'll help you level much quicker. So then after that, we want to go over to the Warbringer board here. This is where we immediately want to slot in the Twister glyph. This is going to be one of our main glyphs for helping us with damage with our twisters. So you want to make sure you slot this early as long as you can find it. Again, slot that here in the Warbringer board. Max out all of the strength nodes you see here. So you get 65 strength out of 40 strength, giving us a whopping like 200 to 300% dust devil damage just from this glyph alone. This is an important one. And I also got rid of some other nodes to make sure we come over here and can reach this legendary node of Warbringer. So that way each 75 fury we spend, we get 15% of our max life as fortify. Helps to fortify our build. Gives us the damage reduction that comes with being fortified. And again, we get additional damage from being fortified as well from some of our key passives. So this is a big one you don't want to skip out on. And then we'll come over here to our Blood Rage board. We have the Rumble glyph here. So your earthquakes deal additional damage. This is a big one because we're going to be leveraging our earthquakes almost all the time. So make sure to take this one. Also take this legendary node for Blood Rage. So that way killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant berserking for 5 seconds and give you additional overall berserking damage. So again, this gives us more uptime on our berserking, making sure we don't ever lose it and constantly get those damage buffs. Then we want to come down here for the 4th board to take the Decimator board and slot the Ire glyph. This is going to give us increased damage while berserking. This is good, again, because we're already going to be berserking. Might as well take more damage, right? And then we also want to take the Legendary Node Decimator. So each time you make an enemy vulnerable, your damage is increased by 10% for 5 seconds. And you get more damage when overpowering enemies, which is just a bonus. But again, we're going to be doing all this stuff anyways, so we get an increased damage buff again just from that node alone. And then for our 5th board, we want the Carnage board, or with the Disembowel glyph. This is going to make it so killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to reduce the cooldowns of your active cooldowns by 1 second. That's the extra ability, again, that helps with our cooldowns and giving us more Dust Devils, more overall damage and power much more quickly. And then we get 8% additional increased bleeding damage. Ideally, you can slot a different glyph here, but currently this is what I like just for the additional bonus to reduce our overall cooldowns. And then we want the Legendary Node Carnage here. So that way while berserking, our critical strikes increase our attack speed, give us up to plus 16% additional attack speed for 6 seconds. You cannot beat that. Again, with our other attack speed buffs on this build, we're going to be rolling through with how fast we can attack. And then finally, for the last board, for the Flawless Technique board, you want to slot the Martial glyph. So that way, after casting a shout skill, the active cooldown of every other non-shout skill is reduced by 2 seconds, giving us quick reduction on a lot of our cooldowns. So again, these boards are set up so that way you can level through them and take the most benefit from them, but also be very powerful in game. So again, if you set them up like this, you will definitely succeed with this build. So the gameplay loop is we will be using Lunging Strike in the early game as a Fury Generation skill. Once Fury Generation is no longer a problem, you can replace that Lunging Strike with Challenging Shout for later game. And then what we want to do is group up enemies. We'll use Leap to essentially leap into a group of enemies, or simply for movement to kind of instantly generate Fury early on in early levels. And then while we're standing in our Earthquake, we're going to be getting automatic damage reduction and big damage buffs. So then we'll cast Rallying Cry to generate lots of Fury and increase movement speed. We'll cast War Cry to increase our damage, and then proc Berserking by just casting War Cry and a lot of our other abilities, giving us even more damage. Again, we'll stand in the middle of the mobs, spam Double Swing for high damage, and start our Dust Devil spam. Again, Earthquake giving us a ton of additional damage there. And then we'll just repeat that, cast Shouts to generate more damage and more Dust Devils, jump, leap into more enemy groups, group up a lot more enemies, jump, leap into those groups, spam our Dust Devils again as we're standing in the Earthquake, use Wrath of the Berserker as you need it for extra damage, and then Challenging Shout again once you swap that out a little bit later in the game. That way it gives you some additional DR in certain big packs. And that's basically how the build works. It's not that complicated, but it's very efficient, and especially once you learn how to use it effectively, it's very, very good.